They did not meet under a sunset or during a romantic school dance. No, they met in detention, the legendary Room 3B, where dreams went to think about their mistakes. She sat on the left side, arms crossed, rehearsing lines in her head instead of regretting her actions. Drama practice had run long again, and she had accidentally forgotten to attend prep. He sat on the right, humming dramatically, tapping the desk like it was a drum set. His crime? Turning morning assembly into an unscheduled comedy special that included accents from 3 countries and 1 imaginary kingdom. Their eyes met. She raised an eyebrow. He bowed theatrically. And just like that, destiny cleared its throat. From that day on, lunch breaks were no longer about food. While other students sprinted toward the dining hall like it was the last supper on earth, plates already imagined, spoons mentally raised, these two ran in the opposite direction. Not because they hated food, they loved food deeply, but because inspiration had developed a very inconvenient habit of arriving exactly at lunchtime. They disappeared into empty classrooms where chalk dust floated like stage fog. They took over dusty corridors and turned them into imaginary streets, palaces, and courtrooms. On ambitious days, they climbed the football field bleachers and declared them the grand balcony of destiny, despite the fact that it smelled faintly of old boots and yesterday's rain. Lunch became rehearsal time. He paced back and forth, reciting lines with exaggerated emotion, occasionally stopping to bow to an invisible audience. She watched, corrected him, then jumped in to demonstrate how it should be done, complete with dramatic pauses that made passing students stop and stare. They shared scripts instead of chapati, ideas instead of juice, and laughter instead of rest. When hunger became impossible to ignore, they tried to combine both worlds, eating and rehearsing, at the same time. This experiment failed spectacularly. In the middle of a tragic monologue about lost love and broken dreams, he gestured too passionately. A piece of cabbage flew through the air like a rejected prop, landing squarely on a prefect's shoe. The prefect did not applaud. A warning letter followed. The cabbage was never seen again. Undeterred, they continued. They argued about tone and timing while sitting on cold classroom floors. They practiced whispers that echoed too loudly. They tested accents so dramatic that even the walls seemed offended. Once, a teacher walked in on them kneeling dramatically on desks, froze, sighed deeply, and walked out without saying a word, defeat clearly written on their back. By the 3rd week, everyone knew them. They became known as those two. Teachers whispered their names like a curse passed down through generations. Have you seen them? Check the corridors. They're rehearsing again. Students, on the other hand, followed them like fans. A small crowd would gather quietly at classroom doors, peeking in, giggling, gasping, and occasionally clapping before remembering they were not supposed to be there. Some students skipped lunch just to watch 5 minutes of rehearsal, an unofficial ticket to the best show on campus. Sometimes the school bell rang and startled them back to reality. They would look at each other, suddenly aware of empty stomachs and passing time. "We forgot to eat again," one would say. "We'll eat tomorrow," the other replied confidently, like someone who had said the same thing yesterday. And so, while the rest of the school counted calories and lunch tokens, these two fed on applause, imagination, and the unshakable belief that something extraordinary was being built one lunch break at a time. Drama tournament season did not arrive quietly. It arrived like a storm. One morning, the school woke up normal. By afternoon, it was no longer a school, it was a theater camp in disguise. Desks became storage units. Curtains disappeared. Someone's bedsheet mysteriously turned into a royal robe. No one knew who approved any of it, but somehow it was happening. Costumes appeared from nowhere. A student walked past wearing a crown made from cardboard and glitter. Another carried a spear fashioned from a broomstick and courage. Shoes were swapped. Scarves became head wraps. Even the notice board lost a corner to urgent stage requirements. Props went missing daily. A drum vanished and reappeared in the biology lab. A walking stick meant for a wise elder role was last seen doubling as a microphone. Scripts changed hands so often that nobody was sure whose handwriting was whose anymore. And through it all, they thrived. Roll calls were skipped with confidence that could only come from believing talent was a valid excuse. While teachers read names aloud, expecting answers, these two were already halfway into a scene somewhere behind the classrooms. Present? Silence. Absent? Very present. Just dramatically unavailable. They ran rehearsals with military seriousness. Timing was everything. Emotion was sacred. Hunger was ignored. Rules were flexible. Once, 5 minutes before inspection, they disappeared. The school panicked. Teachers searched corridors. Prefects scanned the field. The head teacher checked his watch twice. Then, as if summoned by fate itself, they returned, wearing full traditional attire, faces painted with precise care, voices tuned. Emotions turned to maximum volume. They walked in like characters stepping out of history. Inspection froze. Students gasped. Teachers stared. Someone almost clapped before remembering discipline still existed. The head teacher noticed everything. Every skipped lineup. Every rehearsal that ran too long. Every moment when rules bent slightly in the name of performance. He called them to his office so often that the secretary stopped asking why. Sometimes she just sighed and pointed toward the door. The office itself had become familiar territory, the creaky chair, the framed certificates, the clock that ticked louder during awkward silences. "You two," the head teacher would say, staring over his glasses, "have single-handedly reduced my lifespan." They smiled politely, respectfully, the kind of smile that said, "Yes, but look at what we can do." He paced. He lectured. He sighed deeply, a sigh practiced over many years of teaching. Then he stopped. "But," he added, clearing his throat, "I cannot deny the talent." Silence. Those words hit harder than any punishment. That sentence alone fueled them for weeks. They repeated it to each other like a secret victory chant. He said talent. He admitted it. It's prize. That means we're unstoppable. Rehearsals intensified. Scenes sharpened. Mistakes were corrected. Every performance carried something extra: pride, determination, and the need to prove that the stress was worth it. They no longer rehearsed just to perform. They rehearsed to justify every skipped roll call, every missing prop, every meeting in the head teacher's office. The school remained chaotic. A teacher complained. Another secretly watched. The caretaker shook his head but helped move chairs anyway. Even the head teacher, despite himself, began asking quietly, "How is the preparation?" Drama season had taken over. And at the center of it all stood two students, mischievous, passionate, exhausted, and unstoppable, turning school life into rehearsal for something much bigger than they could yet imagine. After classes ended, their real school day began. They practiced under mango trees until mosquitoes joined the cast. They rehearsed in classrooms until the caretaker chased them out. Once, they practiced in the staff room confidently until the deputy head teacher cleared his throat behind them. They failed scenes, forgot lines, argued over delivery. "You're rushing the emotion. You're dragging the pain. You stole my spotlight. I am the spotlight." Yet every argument ended the same way: laughter, a handshake, and a promise to do better. The final national drama tournament arrived. This was not child's play. This was the kind of event where even confident students suddenly remembered their mistakes from 3 years ago, where shoes squeaked too loudly and coughs sounded illegal. Judges sat in a neat row, notebooks open, pens resting like weapons of judgment. Cameras blinked steadily, recording not just performances, but destinies. Silence settled over the hall, heavy, thick, intimidating. Heavier than school rules, heavier than detention, heavier than the head teacher's stare on a bad morning. Backstage, chaos lived quietly. Costumes were checked for the 5th time. Someone whispered lines too fast. Someone else forgot their lines entirely and remembered them again in a panic. A prop nearly broke. Someone prayed. Someone stretched. like they were about to run a marathon. In the middle of it all, they stood together, hands held not out of fear, but familiarity. This hand had pulled the other out of trouble more times than they could count. This was the same hand that had held scripts during lunch breaks, that had gestured wildly in corridors, that had promised, "We've got this," without words. He leaned closer. "If we mess this up, we transfer schools." She smiled. "If we mess this up, we become legends anyway." The curtain rose, and something magical happened. The hall disappeared. The judges faded. The cameras forgot to blink. They were no longer students rushing to beat time limits. They were storytellers. Their voices flowed like they had lived the story, not memorized it. Laughter erupted where it should. Gasps came sharp and honest. Silence wrapped the audience during heavy moments, respectful, complete, powerful. Every pause landed. Every word mattered. Even the head teacher forgot to breathe. And the winners are... Time slowed. Their school's name echoed across the hall. For one full second, nobody moved. They stared at each other like the announcement was a prank. Then chaos. They screamed loudly, unapologetically. They hugged with the force of people who had survived something together. Someone knocked into a trophy stand. Someone cried. Someone fainted again. Not part of the script. Teachers clapped. Students cheered. Cameras zoomed. The head teacher stood slowly, clapping not the polite clap of obligation, but the proud clap of a man whose stress had finally paid off. Later, away from the noise, he pulled them aside. "I knew," he said softly, "you would make us proud, even if you gave me stress." They smiled. That sentence alone felt like another award. Graduation did not separate them, it launched them. Caps flew. Certificates were framed. Parents cried. And before reality could settle in, opportunities arrived. Auditions turned into invitations. Invitations turned into flights. Flights turned into international stages. They performed in cities they once struggled to pronounce. They learned new cultures, new audiences, and new ways to tell stories, sometimes through language barriers, sometimes through exaggerated gestures that worked surprisingly well. Backstage, nothing changed. They still teased each other, still argued about delivery, still blamed each other for missing props. "Don't forget your lines. Don't forget your passport. Don't forget me." They never did. Their love matured quietly. Between rehearsals that ran late, hotel rooms that felt temporary, late-night conversations about dreams, fears, and which one snored louder. They grew together, fell apart sometimes, found each other again stronger, wiser, more patient. They didn't promise perfection. They promised presence. To show up, to listen, to stay. When they decided to exchange vows, it had to be extraordinary. A cruise ship. Because land had limits and their love never had. The ocean stretched endlessly beneath them. The sky painted itself in soft golds and blues. Waves applauded gently against the ship like an audience that never tired. They stood side by side. No scripts, no costumes, no stage directions. Just love. From detention to destiny. From lunch breaks to lifelong partnership. From school drama to a love that never needed rehearsal. And somewhere back home, a head teacher smiled, finally enjoying his peace and the legacy of two students who turned stress into history.